Hi everyone, I'm Robert Ramsey. I'm a culinary instructor and professional chef, and I've been challenged to make breakfast, lunch, dinner, and dessert with oysters. So I've been tasked with preparing 4 meals, and I'll be honest here, I probably wouldn't be making an oyster dessert if I didn't have this challenge. But I'm really excited to try it and to eat oysters 4 times in one day. I know people can be a little bit intimidated by oysters, but I'm here to tell you it's really not that hard with the right technique. And once you're in, the reward is really worth it. Oysters have such a wide range of flavors. You have those typical East Coast oysters that are really briny and salty, and then you have those sweeter, creamier West Coast oysters, and a whole range in between. But as far as opening them goes, they're going to be roughly the same, or the process at least is going to be the same. We're going to start with these East Coast oysters. You can see these are really, really nice and smooth. So we kind of got lucky here. But what we're looking for when we're beginning the process of shucking the oyster is which side is the top and which is the bottom. This one doesn't provide much challenge because this one has a really distinct curve across the bottom and a really noticeably flat surface across the top. And this is important because we always want to make sure that it's right side up when we go to open it. So it gives us a point in which to provide leverage, right? Because our job is to pop that thing open. So I'm going to take the knife in my dominant hand. I'm going to place the oyster on the towel, and then I'm going to protect my non-dominant hand with that towel while wedging the oyster in place so that it doesn't get away from me while I'm opening. Next, insert the tip of the oyster knife into the hinge of the oyster. And we're just feeling for a little gap that'll allow us to get the knife in there. All right, so sometimes you got to move it around a little bit until you find the spot. If you're having trouble opening it, it's less about pushing forward and more about twisting back and forth. I'm going to move the knife back and forth like this, twisting with the goal of hearing this thing pop open. And you'll feel it when it happens. There we go. So that guy just popped, but we're not done yet because the oyster itself, the meat that we eat, is the muscle that attaches the top shell to the bottom shell, which means that the oyster is stuck to this top shell. So you're going to come in from the side, and then you're going to hold the knife as close to the top shell as you can, basically scraping across the top shell, and you'll feel that oyster release in the process. And do the same thing across the bottom. You'll also notice that there's a lot of water inside of the shell. That water is actually something called oyster liquor, and it is a really, really flavorful saltwater mixture. So you want to be really careful to try not to allow that to spill in the process. All right, so the second variety we have here, this is our West Coast, our Kumamoto oyster. This one is not so obvious which side is the cupped side and which side is the flat side. But there are some other indicators that you can look for other than that cupped shape on the bottom. One is that you can look directly down at the oyster, and the top side is the side where the shell is smaller, and I can tell because I can see the edge of one of the shells when I'm looking from above. So this one's going to take me a little more to find the hinge, but it is in there, and there we go. It's popped. And the more you practice, the easier it is to find that little sweet spot. All right, so if we look at them side by side, so here on the left, I have my East Coast oyster. The flesh is a little bit tan, whereas the flesh on the West Coast is paler in the center, but with that dark ring around the outside. Got a nice clean shaped shell here and a very gnarly shaped shell on the Kumamoto. And really, this just depends on where the oyster grew, what the water conditions were, what the water temperature was. All of these things affect the way that the oyster shells grow in the process. And so all different types of oysters are great, but some are definitely easier to open than others. All right, guys, I've got 4 meals to cook today, so we better get started with breakfast. So today for breakfast, we're making a play on shrimp and grits, but we're using oysters as the featured ingredient instead of the shrimp here. We're going to start with a base of stone ground grits, and then we're going to layer on top of that a really delicious mixture of sauteed bacon, spinach, mushrooms, a little bit of shallot, a little bit of tomato. That's going to really add a nice touch, and then on top of that, we're going to put the butter poached oysters. So for this breakfast, we're going to start by prepping our tomato confit. And the reason that we're starting here is that these can go low and slow in the oven while we're working on the rest of the breakfast preparation. As the tomatoes wilt down, the juices and the olive oil will mix together and they'll form this really, really delicious kind of self-made sauce right in the pan. The next thing we're going to do is start working on the topping that we're going to put on top of our grits. And we're gonna start by building a base of flavor with this bacon fat, and we're gonna use that to cook our mushrooms, which we're gonna eventually mix back in with the bacon before we serve this dish. This is great. We've rendered a lot of bacon fat. That's so flavorful. It's a perfect cooking fat for our sauteed mushrooms. Talk about a really decadent, delicious breakfast. And so the last thing that we really need to pull this dish together is our butter poached oysters. This is a really unique preparation. It's called beurre monté, and that's a French term for basically creating an emulsified butter sauce. Now, emulsified just means that we are mixing oil and water so that we get a nice creamy poaching liquid that we're also going to end up using as the sauce for the dish. This is similar to a hollandaise sauce, which is also an emulsion, just without the eggs involved. What we want to do is start with a little bit of water, and optional, a little lemon juice as well, and a pinch of salt. The way that we do this is we're going to go ahead and mix really cold butter into really hot water. And the idea is that that's going to bring the two temperatures to the same point so that we can create that perfect temperature in which the butter will be able to be suspended within the water. I need to add a small amount of butter at a time here because, again, my goal is to moderate the heat. And we're also going to whisk constantly because the more we move it, the more likely we are to have a successful emulsion. There's a little bit of heat adjustment as you go, so I'm watching to see that I've got a simmer without a boil. I'm using cold butter to cool it down if I notice the heat gets a little too high in the pan, but I also don't want to overwhelm it with so much butter at one time that it starts to separate out because I put too much fat in the pan. Okay, so we've got a beautifully formed emulsion, or as the French would say, a proper beurre monté. I'm gonna reduce my heat to the lowest setting. I wanna keep it warm, but I don't wanna risk overheating. And it allows us to cook the oysters really gently in the actual sauce. They're gonna shrink up a little bit and then kind of get plump in the center. And that's my indicator that these guys are ready. And it's gonna take about 3 to 5 minutes total time at this nice, low, gentle temperature. But the other thing that's really nice is that it's not too hot. It's a really gentle temperature. Once they're ready, we can also leave them for another 3 to 5 minutes while we worry about plating the rest of the dish. All right, so let's get our oyster breakfast plated. We're gonna start with grits here on the bottom of the dish. Right. Next up is our topping of our spinach, mushrooms, and bacon. We're gonna follow with a little bit of our oven roasted tomato confit. And I always like to catch a little of the juices in the pan too. And that forms a really nice bed for our oysters that are poached in their own lemon and butter sauce. Really decadent here. Okay, and then finally, we're just gonna top it with some chives, and we're gonna plate that with just a couple slices of our toast. All right, so there we have it. I mean, is this an everyday Tuesday morning breakfast? Definitely not. But if you're gonna challenge me to make a delicious oyster breakfast, we're gonna go all out. Gotta get a little of everything in this first bite. Oh man, that is so incredibly rich and comforting. Buttery, bacony, and then the grits are just warm and creamy and they just coat everything. If you never thought you could have oysters for breakfast, you gotta give this dish a try. We got one dish down, we got 3 more to go, so plenty more oysters to shuck. We better get back to it. Today we're going to be having a fried oyster sandwich, Chesapeake style. When we think about an oyster po' boy, that's a fried oyster sandwich on a soft roll with mayo and shredded lettuce. And we're going to take that and we're just gonna up it one notch. We're gonna use charred marinated cabbage and we're gonna put that on a nice brioche bun. We're gonna bread those oysters with some cornmeal for extra crunch. And we're gonna create a really delicious buttermilk remoulade. One of the key ingredients that we find in the Chesapeake Bay region is Old Bay seasoning. You find it on everything from potato chips to shrimp to crabs to fried oyster sandwiches. It's a really perfect way to season up your oysters for this take on the classic po' boy with a Chesapeake Bay twist. We're gonna start with the cabbage because you really wanna let this rest for about an hour or so before you cook it. And now we're gonna lower it onto this smoking hot grill pan and we're just gonna cook them for a few seconds on each side. We're basically just gonna blister the outside, but we still want it a little crunchy in the middle so that we get that variation in texture. So next up for our sandwich, we're gonna make the sauce, and we're calling this a buttermilk remoulade. And it's really not a classic remoulade, but I think it will pair really, really nicely with our charred cabbage. And we've got creamy and rich fried oysters here, so the sourness in the sauce will do a great job of cutting through that. So we've got all of that prep done, which is great. Now we're ready to go ahead and start dealing with the oysters. We're doing what's called standard breading procedure here. It's a 3-stage process. One of the really nice things about this preparation is how much texture we get on the outside of the oyster. It's a really stark contrast to the creamy oyster that we had in the breakfast dish. We start with flour and eggs here. We're gonna basically create a glue to help get that crispy crust on the outside. And then stage 3 here, this is where we're really gonna get a lot of flavor into this dish. So we wanna really season up our breadcrumb mixture. And this is one of the things that when people start to attempt frying at home that I often see them make a mistake with. They forget to season the breadcrumb mixture, and so that breading just doesn't have any flavor and it ends up falling flat compared to the rest of the dish. We're starting with equal parts cornmeal and breadcrumbs. We're gonna add a good amount of Old Bay seasoning, because remember, you are not in the Chesapeake unless you've got Old Bay. So whether we're talking about oysters or we're talking about chicken or just about anything else that you would put a breading on, we do it in this specific order because of what it does for the shell that kind of forms around the outside. We're using Chesapeake Bay oysters here. I have no problem using these shucked oysters for deep frying, and they are stored in their own oyster liquor, which is the kind of saltwater brine that's naturally found inside of the oyster shell. And that's going to provide a lot of unique flavor that's specific to the particular type of oyster that you're working with. So if I'm trying to create a sandwich that brings me home to the Chesapeake Bay region, then I'm gonna use a Chesapeake oyster because it's got that distinct flavor. But lots of different varieties would be really delicious in this dish. So use what you have available to you. So there we have it, that's our breaded oysters. These are ready to go straight into the fryer, or you can freeze them if you wanna hold them a little bit longer. Oysters are here ready to go. So I'm looking for these oysters to fry at about 350 degrees or so. If you remember back to breakfast, we poached at a really low temperature, and what we ended up with was something that was really tender, soft, and plump. Here, we're gonna do a different approach. We're gonna cook them at a really, really high temperature, so we're gonna get a really, really crispy exterior, but the inside is gonna still stay super, super juicy. So 2 really different results with the same product. Now, as you're frying, you do want to moderate your heat as you go, keeping an eye on what's going on. So remember that you added cold food to a hot pot. That's going to lower the temperature in the pot. So once they're in there, give it a check. We're still in the neighborhood. We dropped down to about 330. So you can see we lost a little heat when we lowered the cold food in, but 330 is just fine. Your cooking time here is less than a minute. I'm looking for a golden brown crispy crust. Don't overdo it here. Oysters don't take long. So we're ready to put this thing together. We've got our nicely toasted bun, our buttermilk remoulade, not a classic remoulade, quite a variation, but a nice smear on the bottom and the top of the bun. We're gonna layer on our cabbage, and we're gonna go ahead and put a nice slice of ripe tomato, onions, and of course, we're gonna layer on some of our big, juicy Chesapeake fried oysters. This sandwich is gonna be messy. It's gonna drip down your chin as you bite into it. It's like a monster, it's so tall, and I just cannot wait to dig into this thing. We've got everything. We've got soft, tender roll on the outside with that nice buttery toastiness to it. Nice bright acidity from the tomato, super juicy oysters. And then the crunch from the cornmeal, so much textural variation. And it's so messy, which is like the best part. Tonight for dinner, we're going to be making an oyster gumbo. This is a really, really classic New Orleans dish and really nice hearty stew. It consists of chicken, andouille sausage, oysters, and jumbo lump crab. So it's really, really luxurious and really, really rich and delicious. So even though this dish, which is a stew, it takes a really long time to cook, the oysters don't go in until the very end of the cooking process so that we can keep them plump and fresh and really, really juicy and delicious. So gumbo relies on building of lots and lots and lots of flavors. So this dish does have a lot of ingredients. And the first thing we're gonna do is prep all of our vegetables. Celery, onions, bell peppers. In Cajun and Creole cooking, that's what's called the Trinity. And it's a really, really delicious combo when we cook them all together. Tomato, okra. In the South, we use a lot of okra because it's a really nice hot weather crop. And okra is kind of interesting because it has a naturally occurring starchy liquid on the inside, which sometimes can be intimidating or turn people off a little bit. But it's really awesome for cooking because what it does is it actually will thicken our stew for us because, again, starch is what we use to thicken sauces and stews. All right, guys, we're gonna start cooking the gumbo here. And the first thing that we're gonna do is brown off the chicken. Everything about making gumbo is about developing flavor in the process. And so even though the chicken is going to actually just fall apart in the stew, and we're not really gonna ever see that crispy brown skin at the end result, it is going to build lots and lots of flavor in the pot. Because that chicken fat, when we mix that with some flour, we're basically building a roux. Usually when we make roux, we make it with butter and flour, but in this gumbo, we're actually using the natural fats from the chicken, from the andouille sausage to make the roux. So we're gonna take our flour, we're gonna add it into the pot, and we're gonna continually mix. Now, it's really important that you, from here on out, mix constantly for the next 20 minutes or so until your flour starts to turn a deep, almost chocolate brown. This is a commitment right here, but it's worth it for a good gumbo. And we're just gonna stir and stir and stir. Okay, folks, so we have got our brown roux cooked down with all of our aromatic vegetables. So we're ready to start turning this base into a beautiful stew. Add that chicken back in there. You guys did a great job stirring for 20 straight minutes. Now we get to have hands-off time and just relax. Look how thick that has gotten. That is the roux and the okra working together to turn that thin, watery soup that we started with into this ridiculously thick, delicious stew. But we gotta add the most important part, which is our shellfish. We're gonna add our shucked oysters and our picked crab, and we're gonna let those simmer until they're just cooked through. We're talking 5-6 minutes here. Look how nice and plump that is. Now that's actually a great indicator that your oyster is fully cooked. All right, so those are looking good to go. I would say we've got a pot of gumbo that is thick and delicious and ready. Time for us to taste. Oh, yeah. Yeah. We are ready to go. We've got a bowl of piping hot gumbo here, and I could not be more excited about it. With all the oyster dishes that we're preparing, this is the one I am 1,000% confident about. I love a good oyster gumbo. So let's dig in and give it a try. We've got a lot of classic Cajun Creole style flavor pairings going on here. Again, this is an East Coast oyster, so it's got that nice salty, assertive brininess to it. Pairs really nicely with that smokiness from the andouille sausage. And they're really a finishing touch so that they can be a standout star on the plate. So our last course tonight is dessert, and obviously this is the biggest challenge to come up with a dish that moves oysters from the savory side of the kitchen into the dessert side of the kitchen. So the first thing I did is I selected a West Coast variety of oysters that's known for being both creamy and sweet in flavor and has a really low salt content for an oyster. One thing that a lot of desserts and oysters have in common is that they're served ice cold, right? So I used that for an inspiration as well. And one of the first things that popped to mind is serving them with a savory granita. And a granita is basically kind of like a homemade snow cone. We're making the granita out of grapefruit. And grapefruit is really nice because it has a fantastic balance between sweet, sour, and bitter. And then the last thing is that we know that oysters like creamy things as well. And so we're gonna make a flavored sort of whipped cream of sorts, but we're gonna use creme fraiche, which is a type of sour cream. And that creme fraiche is going to help balance a little bit of sweetness that we're gonna introduce and a lot of depth of flavor from fennel. Now, fennel and grapefruit pair perfectly, and oysters really like fennel too. So when we bring these three flavors together and then just sweeten them up a little bit with some sweet dessert wine and a touch of sugar, what we're going to do is really amplify the sweet notes of those ingredients and kind of downplay the savoriness. I think all of those ideas sound great in theory, but I will say I have never tried this before, so let's see if it works. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do before we even get started is we're gonna bloom the gelatin, and that's because this can be done ahead of time. And I'm just gonna mix that in. And there's nothing else I really need to do here except let this sit while I prep my other ingredients. We're gonna start working on the grapefruit granita. We're going to add simple syrup, and we're just gonna whisk them together. And then all we're gonna do is put this in the freezer and wait. We're gonna wait until it's most of the way frozen, but not 100% of the way frozen. And the reason that we want to do this is we're going to start scraping it with a fork so that it gets light and fluffy. Again, think like a snow cone. Next, in order to prep our creme fraiche mixture that we're going to be topping the oysters with, we're going to dice a head of fennel. We're going to get a tremendous amount of flavor from this, and we're even going to get a spring green tinge that it's going to give to the liquid as well, which is kind of nice. So the next thing that we want to do here is add some wine. We're going to add a little bit of a nice sweet wine. I'm using a Riesling today, but any dessert wine will do. Watch those eyebrows. Now, we're gonna simmer this down au sec, okay? And that's a term that just means that we're simmering it until it's almost dry. And the reason that we do this is this wine has a lot of sugar in it, which means that it's going to start to get syrupy as it reduces. The next thing we're gonna do here is we're gonna add in our heavy cream, and then we're also going to add vanilla beans. A little vanilla extract just to kind of boost that flavor as well. And we're gonna go ahead and also add our gelatin. And if you look closely here, you'll be able to see that gelatin has gel. We're not trying to make a batch of Jell-O here, but we are trying to stabilize our whipped cream. The creme fraiche that we're gonna mix in is gonna prevent it from being quite as airy as a normal whipped cream would be. And so this is going to help keep that whipped cream from deflating. All right, the next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna strain out the solids here so that we can go ahead and make our whipped cream. It's like making chicken stock. You know, we've simmered all of the flavor into the liquid, so we don't need those solids anymore. We've got 1 cup of creme fraiche, and so when we mix the vanilla, the little bit of sugar, and that sourness from the creme fraiche, we get a great sweet and sour. We're gonna transfer this to a pastry bag. Just transfer this to the fridge and let it sit for a couple hours. While that's setting, we're gonna take a look at our granita. Remember, we made this really nice grapefruit granita, and I'm just gonna simply come in here and I'm just gonna scrape it. As I scrape, you'll see the texture of that granita really change. It gets light and fluffy, and that's exactly what we're looking for. Now, we're gonna do this a couple times throughout the freezing process. Once you have it scraped and ready to go, it becomes a lot easier to deal with than when it's one big block. So now, anytime that it starts to kind of recongeal together, I can just scrape it again. So now I'm just gonna put this back in the freezer. We'll check it again every half hour until we're ready to serve this oyster dessert. All right, so let's go ahead and open the oysters for our dessert. Because we're serving these raw on the half shell, we're gonna go ahead and shuck them. We're gonna leave them in the shell, and then we're gonna hold them on ice until we're ready to eat here in a couple minutes. Ah, we've got a dead oyster. So sometimes you might open up an oyster and there is no liquid inside at all and it's shriveled up. It is not safe to eat that, okay? So it does happen once in a while. I'd say 1 out of every couple dozen. It's not the end of the world, but you definitely want to pick those out as you're going. Okay, we're in. Much, much better. Really fills the entire shell. It's got the liquid inside. It's got a nice pale creamy color to it, kind of a pearly color. That's what we're looking for. So this one's definitely good to go. There we have it. And we're gonna top these with our fennel cream and grapefruit granita, and we're gonna make a dessert out of them. Honestly, like, I would eat it again. There's citrus, there's creamy. The oysters are so mild. There's really almost no salt to them. ice cold. It's got a couple different textures going on between the crunchy from the granita and that creamy whipped topping. And actually, to be fair, I would eat them not for dessert too. They're not overly sweet. This isn't, it's not chocolate cake. But yeah, it's a nice way to end a meal. I mean, I think it would be weird to have it on a dessert menu just because I think people don't associate oysters with dessert, and so they would be surprised by it. But if you closed your eyes and ate this and somebody said, what course was that? You would definitely say dessert. So we made it, guys, and I hope that you are inspired to try some new and different preparations with oysters. If we can do a dessert, what can't we do with oysters? So get out there, try them cooked, try them raw, try them fried, and hey, try them for dessert. Why not? I hope you're inspired and are gonna go dig into some oysters.